let's get kick started. So hi, I'm Lilia from Territory 3 Kiwi Landing Pad Reimagines. Today we've got Eoin McMillan from Sourcetable to kind of come and share a bit about his story so far, background, how did he found Sourcetable, what does it do, what does the future look like, and kind of around the topic of the future of spreadsheets is spreadsheets. So very interested to hear what you've got to share with us, Eoin. And I know you've got a bit of a presentation as well, which we can get into soon. But I'd love to know first, just a bit about your background. So where are you based at the moment? What have you done in the lead up before Sourcetable, other startups, other work? We'd just love to know a bit more about yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name's Eoin. So my name's Eoin. I'm the founder of Sourcetable. Sourcetable is a spreadsheet company based in San Francisco. We'll get to that over the next half hour. So I suppose I've done a lot of stuff over the last 11 years. I moved to San Francisco February 1st, 2011, because I really liked the internet. I've tried and failed at a bunch of startups, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of some successful startups as well. Along the way, let's see, I helped a guy, Ilias, set up Startup House, which was the biggest hostel in the world for entrepreneurs. That was based downtown San Francisco. We had a lot of Kiwis there. Our first guest came through the Kiwi landing pad. I set up and ran a consulting shop for many years called SF Dev Labs. So we used to build a lot of technology projects for startups all the way through up to banks. I also did a lot of business consulting. So I've worked at a bunch of startups, a lot of marketplace startups. So I worked at a company called Airpair, which was a coding marketplace. Worked at a company called Wonder School, which was a childcare marketplace. And I spent a lot of time at Hipcamp, which is a camping marketplace. So I was at Hipcamp from pre-revenue through Series B. I ran special projects there. I did stuff like run their demand-side product team, their SEO team, their marketing team. And they're now the largest private camping marketplace in the world. So that was pretty fun. And then on the side along the way, learned how to code. And so have done both the business side and the technical side of startups. I like them.
Yeah, no, so you've actually been quite a fair few. Didn't realize it was quite that many. That's awesome. Yeah, and so you're based in San Francisco at the moment. How are you finding it there in the community and growing your startup from there?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love it. I'm not sure it's for everyone, but if you're interested in doing startups, my personal advice is you should move to a major hub. I wanted to get into startups, and at the time I was living in Sydney, and so I moved over here, and I'm really glad I did. And the reason is because you just have such a high density of people doing similar stuff, and you also have a density of people who are culturally similar. And by culturally similar, I mean like startups are very risky, startups are very hard. Not everybody understands the journey you're going through. And they also don't necessarily understand kind of the ups and downs and even having good advice. And compared to what at the time was very risk-averse Sydney and people asking like, why do you want to be unemployed? In San Francisco, it's more, how can I help you? And that's a really big cultural shift. So yeah, I've really loved it. I've made tons of friends here. And, aside from everything else, the Bay Area is a beautiful place to be. You've got Marin County and parks and wildlife and everything around you. So it's really, really nice mix.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've definitely felt that that vibe over there as well. It's very supportive, really great community. Sorry, I just missed a call. Awesome. It would be great actually to jump into the presentation that you've got. Sure. If you're keen to bring that one up. And just for those watching, just let us know if you can't see the slides or if anything.
I'm just going to set it up now.
Okay, cool. I think it's coming up.
Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, we're going to be talking about Sourcetable today. Sourcetable is a next generation spreadsheet, similar to Excel or Google Sheets, but the main thing that we do is we make it really easy to access all of your data live from any application, whether that's your sales data or your marketing data or your database data or anything. We're going to be getting into that, but maybe I'll just start with an agenda. A bit about who am I? I think we went through a little bit just now in the startup context. My understanding of the audience here is it's kind of founders, people who might want to be founders, people who might want to work at startups or do work at startups. So I thought I'd go into that a little bit. and then obviously go into my own founder journey and how I came to Sourcetable. Why would any sane, rational human being build a spreadsheet going up against kind of Excel and Microsoft and Google? And then there's a little bit on the history of spreadsheets, which not everyone will be into, but some people will really, really be into, because that blends with what technology curves have been happening in society and what potential does that unlock in terms of surface area for new startups and competing against large incumbents. But if the only reason that you came here is to be able to access Sourcetable, just shoot us an email and we'll get you access. Just as a heads up, we're currently in private beta. And so if you just say you're from Kiwi Landing Pad or you're in the webinar, we'll shoot you through. Okay, so a little bit about my story. We went through it very briefly then, but I think probably a good place to start is that the journey of an entrepreneur is obviously very, very squiggly. And it's not obvious necessarily where you'll end up when you get started. When I grew up, I actually grew up in Sydney, so thanks for having me, Kiwis. When I grew up, I was not surrounded by entrepreneurship at all. It was not a thing in my worldview or my world, and I didn't know anyone doing it. And at college, I studied business and sociology, but that didn't expose me to it either. And I had a ton of different jobs until ultimately realizing, like, hey, the corporate working world is probably not for me. I really want to have a lot of agency over what I'm doing. And so that led me to kind of figuring out, what am I going to do? And I had the option of either going and being a sculptor or going back to art school, going into international development, or pursuing the internet as a career path. And my personal worldview is, if you can, you should help. And the internet is this incredible vehicle for change in society. It's this once in a multiple generation opportunity to really be part of shaping a core technology that humans use. So that's a personal belief I hold, but I also hold a personal interest in networks. I mentioned I studied sociology. I got really, really deep down the rabbit hole of looking at social networks and technology networks and bacterial networks and genetic networks and mycelial networks and communication networks. And obviously the internet is the biggest network of them all. Certainly it's very interesting. And so for me, I find information networks very interesting. And this is something most people don't talk about, but I think it relates to how much energy do you have for a startup? How long can you sustain working on the same thing for a long period of time? So for me, things that give me energy are like things that connect information to information, things that connect people to people, and things that connect people to information. So these are like information network problems. And for whatever reason, it just appeals to my brain. I know I can work on this stuff all day, every day for a very long time. And so any startup that sits in this domain is very interesting to me. And it's probably also why I like marketplace startups, because they have network effects that blend in with that. I tried a bunch of stuff when I first got to San Francisco, but before I go into what I'm doing now, I might start with a cautionary trail of, just because things give you energy does not necessarily mean you should work on them as a startup. And this might be the difference between a startup and a hobby. So when I started, hi, Jackie from Wellington and Claire Perry. When I started over here, the first real thing I had a crack at was actually building a discovery engine for the internet. I was very interested in, how do I find other websites or web pages that are like this web page? And so this is a very rudimentary SEO search for what is similar to the Territory 3 website, and you'll see that there are competitors and referring domains. And this is how I kind of saw the world. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could get this consumer engine that would show you everything that was like everything else on the web? And I had a lot of energy for it. But unfortunately, it also has to sit in this matrix of kind of entrepreneurship. Is this a problem I have? Yes. Is this a problem other people have? No. Is this a problem people will pay for? Definitely not. While I was working on this, I had people telling me actively, like, I am not going to use this, even if you finish it, even if you build it. And that was something I ignored for a long time and had to learn the hard way that there's a difference between a hobby and a company. And a company really is defined by whether or not you're able to make more than you spend. And so start with that cautionary tale on the journey to building Sourcetable. And so I was pretty burned out after that experience, but I learned a lot about computers, learned a lot about technology, learned a lot about taking on hard challenges, and was just working on various business teams where, I knew I wanted to work on something again, but I was kind of facing what I didn't realize at the time were the kinds of problems that would ultimately lead me to building Sourcetable. So I would be managing business teams. People would either not be able to build a report because they weren't technical enough to access the database, or they would bring me a report as a manager and say, hey, here's the report that I've created. And if I had questions, they couldn't necessarily answer them because they couldn't audit their work, or we couldn't go back and check the query. And also the data in that report was not up to date. And so because I was a technologist, what I would do is I would just hack my spreadsheets. I would get in and write code and, get little XML scripts to be able to pull my data in and filter it and get everything working. But all I ever really managed to do was to shift a bottleneck from a data team over to me. So I didn't actually solve the problem, but it was around this time we were doing consulting work through my consulting company that something really interesting happened. We had a construction company asking us to build them a data cube in Excel. And how that came to be is we're actually trying to sell them machine learning services. And they said, oh, this is all magical and wonderful, but like, I can't even access my data. And we're like, what do you mean you can't access your data? And the guy turns his screen and points at a spreadsheet and says, I can't access my data. And we realized, oh, we're trying to sell them what we think are solutions, but actually the problem that this person faces, which was exactly the same problem that I had been facing seeing as a manager in the working world, was that for most people at most companies, it is too hard for them to access their data, full stop. And that sounds like a really obvious statement, but it actually turns out that when you go into sales teams and marketing teams and business teams, there's always a mess in terms of who has access to what. And that led us down the rabbit hole of realizing, oh, spreadsheets themselves are only for a certain group of people and they're not networked to all the information around them. And so the first thing we did is obviously build a data cube, get paid, and then another client came, built another data cube, got paid, built another data cube, got paid. And the reason these people wanted data cubes is so that way they could access their data, which was sitting in a MySQL database, build a report without coding, and see that report stay up to date. And the reason why that up-to-date piece was important for them is because if it didn't track over time, they may not realize in their use case that their budgets weren't tracking, and a small cost overrun for them was a huge amount of money as a big client. And so we realized, aha, there must be something here, because it's a problem I have, it's a problem others have, and they'll pay us for it. In addition to, I have a lot of energy to work on this. And the reason I mention that is if something goes well, 5 to 7, 10 years, is going to be the path you're going down. And so I think that's just something to be aware of. So in terms of, without Sourcetable as a spreadsheet, but what problems do we solve, right? This game is about solving problems for people that they'll pay for. And for us, these problems are very, very simple. Can I access my data in a spreadsheet? And then once I can access it, does it stay up to date? And if we can solve those problems, we know that people will pay for it. And so this problem essentially took us down the rabbit hole of looking at how people were accessing their data in spreadsheets. The first thing we did actually, sorry, I'll get to this slide. First thing we did actually was to make a better database access tool in Excel and put it in the marketplace. And that allowed us to then tap into the wider world of people accessing their data. We initially thought it was a very small lens of like operators and marketing people. And that really blew open our minds to how big spreadsheets are and how big the opportunity was, because we saw researchers and data scientists and CEOs and CFOs and COOs and marketing ops and sales ops and rev ops and financial ops and HR and just, absolutely all the different knowledge workers you could think of having similar categories of problem, sometimes with a universal data set, for example, MySQL, but often in their own different data set. And they were having trouble accessing their data, querying their data, keeping their data up to date. And so when you actually look at the current state of the world, most people spend a lot of time running around and downloading CSV files from each of their different business tools, putting it in a spreadsheet, building a report, and then if something goes wrong, they have to go back to the original source, download everything again, or they just have to do this every day or week or month because the data is stale, right? The other option is they can use plugins, and plugins tend to break and be brittle, and we'll get into why that is. And so this is the current state of the world, and you can tell it's a very unhappy user. And we found that a very simple solution was to just make all of the data accessible to the user without having to code. So what we do is we say, hey, we'll provide you with a spreadsheet. It has all the formulas and functions and everything you need because you understand that interface. It's not something new. It's very familiar. And then in addition to that, you can just access your Instagram or your Shopify or your email or your Facebook or your Google Ads or whatever. You can access all your data inside that spreadsheet always without having to set up anything through code. You just put your username and password in or whatever, and that data is always synced and always live. And we found that that was enough to prove to a user and to prove to us that this was actually something really, really valuable to them. Which brings us to the history of spreadsheets. Like, how do we get to this state of the world where everybody's doing everything manually? Well, I won't go through the whole story, but for 6,000 years, humans have been using tabulated data, right? It is as old as the history of trade itself, or certainly recorded trade. And skipping ahead, you can see that only 50 years ago, we were still running everything on paper. And so this is how someone on Reddit runs a gas station. But this is what the world actually looked like before Excel turned up and before other tools turned up. And people forget, like, this way of structured thinking, columns and rows, is a very natural thing for humans to do in terms of an interface. So when spreadsheets really got started, you had VisiCalc, was the first one out of the gate. Dan Bricklin and a very talented team built this for the Mac. And all of a sudden, not only did you have this kind of paper effect of columns and rows, but you could reference from one place to another reference. And if you changed anything, everything updated automatically. This is mind-blowing stuff 50 years ago. And then from there, you found Lotus Notes. If you've heard of Mitch Kapoor, very wealthy guy, he built Lotus Notes, and that was the original killer app for the IBM, IBM computers. And so you notice that the history of spreadsheets tracks very closely to the history of technology for quite a while. Then Excel came out. Excel was probably the killer app that led to Microsoft being the powerhouse that it is. People forget this, but Excel alone is worth like 6 times all of business intelligence combined. It is used by 800 million people. It is a juggernaut. It runs capitalism, full stop. And what they did is they went from building something that the users asked for to building something that users needed, which was making everything really user-friendly. And so they got really good at GUIs and points and click and making things a little bit more visual and a little bit more usable. But up until Google Sheets came along, we'll get to that, all of the way that spreadsheets worked was in this worldview where all of your data lived on one machine, effectively. And if it didn't live on one machine, the way that you would pass around your data was in XLSX files, workbooks. And so you'd pass it back and forth as this very static data model where everything was in a contained universe. And of course, that is no longer the universe today. Google Chrome and others, you saw this, when was it? Google Sheets came out in 2006, and that was one of the first front-end applications that really changed how we were able to do things in a browser. So you had Google Sheets, you had email, and you had a few other applications that really led the way. The front-end frameworks that we experience today and really enjoy today, this is where that all started. But that was 18 years ago, or 16 years ago. And so you look at what Google Sheets did is they finally made things collaborative. You could actually access the same document from multiple different places, which sounds revolutionary back then, and today it's just expected. But what they traded off was that to be able to keep all the data in the machine, you have to lose a lot of power. There's a lot less storage and there's a lot less power. And Google Sheets decided to solve this through plugins. And we'll get to the problem of plugins in a moment. But that's essentially the history of spreadsheets to date. The problem for this is obviously there's more data today, and data is more fragmented today as we went through. And Google Sheets doesn't really solve this problem unless you're willing to buy into the Google stack. Likewise, Microsoft doesn't really solve this problem unless you're willing to use like Power Pivot and DAX and Microsoft Access and Microsoft Excel. And so we end up with this problem where Google came along with a very underpowered collaborative spreadsheet, and they said, here's some JavaScript, develop community, have at it, and use plugins as a way to be able to interface with the outside world. And that was good enough for a while, but unfortunately, plugins lead to a number of problems. The first of which is that they have an opinion on how data should run. The second of which is that they don't play nicely together. The third of which is that they do not actually live inside the spreadsheet. So if anything goes wrong, you can't track what went wrong, where did it go wrong, who created this, when was it created, what does it connect to? You lose all of that context that makes working with data normal and easy, and I would say fun. The second thing, obviously, is that the spreadsheet itself is being determined, the power of the spreadsheet is being determined by Microsoft or by Google. And if you really want to improve upon this format as an entrepreneur, you have to be able to control the interface as well as the technology stack. All these plugins, ultimately, they need a controller controlling everything to make sure that it's all logical and organized the way you would a regular computer. And so what we came along and realized is, hey, there's actually been a ton of innovation that's come out in terms of cloud computing and data connectors and front-end frameworks and dashboarding. And what users are wanting when they express their problems to us is that they want all of these things packaged into one solution without having to code, and they want it to be stable and performant and always live and always up to date. So ultimately, we realized we needed to go from this old legacy model to the new way of doing things, which was to build effectively a better spreadsheet. The criteria was it needs to be more powerful than Excel, needs to be more collaborative than Google Sheets, and it needs to be networked to your data. That's how we ended up down this. Now, it's not always obvious when you talk to users. Like, spreadsheets are the most horizontal of all the apps you could possibly build. You have like a vertical SaaS app that might go after just, for example, I don't know, interest rates and home loans. But then when you have spreadsheets, you have, between Excel and Google, what is it? It's over 1 billion users combined, right? And so you have the most horizontal application. And so you end up getting all sorts of problems that people will ask you. I'm not going to go through all this now, but I know that this is recorded, so you can save it later. But people will say things like, our spreadsheets keep breaking. Now, they don't know why it's breaking, but the reason it's breaking is because of a data model problem with the way their plugins work. They complain about a lot of stuff like, hey, I need to analyze my data, but I don't know how to code, I don't know SQL. A lot of engineers complain. They're like, I wish the business team would just leave me alone and stop bothering me so I can build my applications. But once again, the main ones that we saw was, I can't access my data wherever it is, and the data is not up to date. And they don't say the data is not up to date. They might say, we spend a lot of time manually building things, right? So the way they say what they're saying isn't always one-to-one with an exact problem statement. And then they have other things which turned up along the way as other problems, which were not necessarily top of mind trying to solve, but like, they want to be able to share files securely, and Google Sheets is not secure enough. They want to be able to audit, spreadsheets, check provenance of data. They want to be able to, do things like that. And so other things they might ask us is actually very easy problem statements for us to figure out, which is like, I want to be able to visualize my data in a dashboard, but I can't do that for the reason of this tool, Pipedrive does not allow me to do that in a way that I want. Or this tool, Stripe, does not allow me to query my data without SQL. Or this tool, MailChimp, doesn't connect to my Stripe data, so I can't check my recurring subscriber payments. Or, lots of different problem sets associated with data. One we found just by accident was, which I'm sure everyone here has experienced, my CSV is too big to load in a spreadsheet. Can't do it. So we knew there were a lot of problems. And when we solve all these problems, but the main ones we solve is data access and data freshness. Is it up to date? For the nerds here, let's go through some technology stuff. I find this very interesting, and maybe you will too. So when you look at essentially how innovation happens, it tends to happen in terms of waves of technology that is available. Spreadsheets obviously did not take advantage properly of the mobile wave, but there are other waves that have come about. I mentioned front-end frameworks before, but like React is a really big deal. React and Vue and Next.js and these tools you can work with and packages you can work with make it really, it just makes it possible for a small team to build an advanced application in a way that was not, say, 10 years ago. And if you're going up against a large enterprise, they tend to move really slowly. So you may find there's a lot of surface area that has been left untapped. And so when you look at the kinds of companies that have arisen from these technology waves, you'll see Figma, I think they just sold for 30 billion. There's Flux, which is a collaborative hardware startup. There's Pitch, which is a collaborative slide deck startup. All of this is getting unlocked because new technology has made it possible to build new applications. So in the case of Figma, I can't remember if it was WebGL or WebAssembly, but that really unlocked what was possible for them. And their first demo was actually just can I show a rotating sphere that looks really glossy without losing frame rate? And if I can do that, then I can raise money and prove I can build a full-on, design application. If you're building a spreadsheet, technologies that are important for us, WebAssembly is a huge thing. Being able to not just use JavaScript, but any language to be able to compile data makes it possible for us to be able to make things fast and performant with large amounts of data, which was not previously possible, right? So if you want a 10x performance just on the front end, that's now a possibility. There's database innovations, which just for the reasons of my company, I'm not going to talk about those. There's other innovations that are quite obvious and helpful for building real-time applications. Like you've got CRDTs and operational transforms for being able to handle merge conflicts, which come with things out of the box you wouldn't expect but are helpful. For example, CRDTs will give you a better changelog. You'll be able to audit, what happened in the past. And if you're building for enterprise users, that stuff's important. WebSockets is a huge deal. Being able to see what's happening on the screen at the same time as other people is now not that difficult, right? It's accessible to a small team. In our case, something that's become really relevant and is relevant to a lot of people, especially in the SaaS space, is the commoditization of just data transfer and ETL. So you'll find there's companies like Fivetran and Airbyte and Singer and Stitch and Plaid. There's tons of different companies that are handling the data transfer layer, which means that instead of having to build an entire data team yourself, you can spend time focusing on the user experience. And the last one I mentioned here is user-friendly design. I think most people tend to forget about this, but Airtable didn't just make tabular data easier to work with. They made it psychologically approachable for people. The actual application is not that different to Microsoft Access, but the way people experience it is fundamentally different. And they were able to build, a public company off that. I think so. Maybe they're not public yet. Anyway, technology is a big driver of change. For us, we see all of these things coming together as a big wave that enables us to know that we're still early in many parts of the cycle, and building into a good, solid, stable base for the future. And when we look at our competitors, they may be well-funded, but they were built on previous technology stacks. So it takes a long time for them to really transform everything over to the modern world, and we get to build from that from scratch, which is an advantage. So why now? In terms of our company, well, we generally solve a data access and data fragmentation and data freshness problem. And all of these technology waves you look at previously, they didn't just unlock the possibility for us to be able to build something. As I'm sure you've noticed, SaaS is a major category that took off. And that became possible because you had things like AWS, making it possible to just build startups really, really cheaply. And that led to an explosion of tools and applications for every kind of use case you could possibly think of, and every department you could possibly think of. The unfortunate effect here is that now your data lives in as many data silos as you can possibly think of. So we spent a lot of time building solutions to solve that gap, right? So if you have data in all these different places and your problem is data fragmentation, well, the solution some point has to be to bring all that data together. And up until today, if you look on the left side, the way that we traditionally think of things is that the engineering team is tasked with somehow solving this data gap. And we call a bit of BS on that. And the main reason is because where people actually want to access their data is in spreadsheets. But talking through the capability gap just for a minute, the way the modern world works right now, if you're, let's say, a seed stage founder all the way through Series B or more, is your data no longer fits inside a spreadsheet. At some point, you have to get your engineering team to stop doing what they're doing, to go and set you up a data warehouse, then to go and set you up a business intelligence tool, then to go and write a bunch of queries, to then set up essentially a data library for you, and then eventually get back to the core product, which is building value for customers. And this is an interruption point for most companies. And you often find that, say, the company might hit Series A, they'll hire a head of business operations. The head of business operations has the first task to be able to grow the business. They don't even know what works. And the reason they don't know what works is because they can't access the data. So they have to spend the first 3 months of the job just setting up infrastructure and making the right decisions in terms of tooling and choices. And the reason for that is there's a capability gap. Most people don't know how to code. and most people don't know SQL. And in the data community, if you speak to data engineers and data analysts over here, there is an expectation that people will learn SQL. And it has been my experience from speaking to many spreadsheet users that they don't want to learn SQL and they're not going to. And when I say spreadsheet users, I mean like analysts, like Wall Street analysts, that kind of stuff. They could, they have the capability, they just don't want to. They're excellent at a data tool. That tool is called Excel, and they don't want to change their behavior. And so we recognized this and realized, hey, what people need is data infrastructure. What they want is data infrastructure without changing their core experience, which is in the spreadsheet. And so we decided to plug that capability gap by providing a turnkey solution, which was effectively unlimited storage, effectively unlimited sync to all of the different data sources, and to make that accessible in a spreadsheet. And as long as people can do like pivots and VLOOKUPs, then they already know how to set up their data library. They already know how to do, data cleanup, data query operations, and they can do that through a point and click interface. They don't have to write SQL. And so for us, this is a big why now, which is we see these tailwinds. It's now possible to build these things. Because it's possible to build these things, this is kind of perpetual problem that's increasingly fragmenting data across the entire business landscape. People want to use spreadsheets. We're able to fill the gap and build a modern spreadsheet that actually fills their need. So that's kind of what we're up to. I think the final piece of the agenda was how can we help founders? Well, as I mentioned, we're in private beta. So if people would like to use Sourcetable, we'd be happy to help you get set up. And the only exchange that we'd like is just to be able to get feedback on the product. That's really important to us in terms of where we are in our company lifecycle. But how we can help you is that obviously we can give you data access, whether it's Stripe or HubSpot or Salesforce or Shopify or MySQL or Postgres, or just go to the website. There's a ton of different integrations. And then the second thing we can help you with is just basic report automation. What is the state of my business? What is my CAC or my churn or my LTV or my return on ad spend? And how did that change from day to day through the business? All of those are really easy to set up inside a spreadsheet. We can help you if you need a hand. There are other uses that we find people use Sourcetable for. They were not the primary problems that we set off to solve, but some people just use it as a simple dashboarding tool. Some people use it just because they want a data infrastructure layer to be able to centralize their data. Some people use it because they want an operations workflow. They want to see, did my logistics, get done? Are my orders being sent? What's my return rate? They just want to be able to see their workflows. And then some people just want to be able to access a template library, which we're building out. So for example, if you want, simple spreadsheet models and to be able to use them out of the box, we can help you with that too. We've been going for a minute. I can give you all a product demo. I can't actually see anyone, so this is a bit weird. I can give you all a product demo. Lily, do you have any questions, or should I just jump into it?
No, I reckon just jump right into it. And just a note for those watching, if you do have any questions, now's the time to start putting those into the Q&A button here on Zoom, or you can chuck them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So any questions, technical, non-technical, just curious about Owen's life and SF or anything like that, yeah, just chuck those into Q&A or the chat. But yeah, if you want to jump into the product demo, that would be cool. For
sure. And yeah, Michelle, you're absolutely right. I met Dylan from Figma once, and super nice guy, like could not be happier for his success. I think we all want to see the right people succeed, and he's just an absolute legend. So I think very, very happy moment to see him do well. Also really nice to see them just build a great product. We basically build Sourcetable using Figma. So okay, so what are we doing? Let's take a look at Sourcetable. So this is Sourcetable. If you already know how to use a spreadsheet, then you know how to use Sourcetable, right? So the basics we'll just get started with are as follows. You can, of course, invite your teammates and colleagues. You can create workbooks. All of this is things that you kind of already know. In the workbook, it works the way you think it does. So, you can refer from one cell to any other cell. And that's important because if you're using Airtable or Smartsheet or Notion or any of the other table-based solutions, they don't actually offer cell-based modeling. They offer either column or row. And if you want to get your whole team doing analysis in one place, you'll find that they do not want to use just column and row. They want a full spreadsheet experience. In addition to that, we have charts and graphs and conditional formatting and 450 formulas, and we have, all the shortcuts you would expect. I know people really love their shortcuts. Yeah, let's just get stuck into it, right? So one of the things you can do in Sourcetable is I've mentioned that you get access to all of your data. You get access to all of the data in a sidebar here. It's super easy. If you want to add an integration, I think I mentioned that we have quite a lot previously. And usually you just need your username and password to get things set up. If it's a database, you'll need your database credentials. We take read-only access. We don't write back to the source. And the reason for that is we want to know that you can always trust the data, and it's always the truth. So you've got all these integrations. Let's say that I want to get access to my user table. So obviously we use a lot of different data. We've got like our support data and our sales data and our e-commerce data. But let's say I just want to get access to my users. So I can just pull in my users table here, and I might want to know, oh, who are my users? What are my usernames? Oh, great. Okay, so now I've got this table. The table's called users. I can now start referring to that table if I want. So if I want, I can just go, can't fix syntax. So if I want to just pull the table in, I can. If I want to pull in columns, I can do that. And I can just refer to the columns, and you get a list of columns. But if I want to do basic simple math, so I can be like, let's get a count of our users, right? Oh, sorry, equals, you still have to do your spreadsheet work correctly. So it is equals count A users, which I think the spreadsheet people will know. And then we want to get the username. And so we can get a count of our users, right? And every time a new user joins, that number is automatically going to update. And so it's really easy for me to track what's going on in our business. And for various reasons, I'm not going to show you the full suite that we use to run Sourcetable, but it's very easy for us to track what's going on in the business at any point in time, how many workbooks people have created, who's doing what. We just track it all and we see everything stat to date. Going to our users table though, I might be like, oh, what organization do these users come from? And unfortunately, if anyone has set up data here before, they will know that data actually lives in different tables. There's no one single table that has all the data that you need. But you might find that you actually have the organization name for these users sitting in a different table. So you may want to access your joins. So I can go and look for I might want to get my default organization ID and then join that. Because we centralize all data in Sourcetable, you can connect anything to anything, which can actually be quite helpful if you're building cross-channel reports. I won't go through all that now, but for now, we can go organizations, and then I can look and see, we'll provide you with a recommendation on a join. So if you're not familiar with your data tables, we can say, oh, we know that the ID column will match with the default organization ID column. And that makes life really easy for everyone. And so, sorry about that. And so if I want to pull in the name, the organization name, I can now extend my table, create a display name for my table, and I can be like, oh, this user comes from that company. This user comes from that company. Now, most of the time, you're actually not going to be doing all this setup work from scratch. What you want to be doing is creating things like a user table so other people in your organization can access this data down the line. The way that this gets done today in most companies is that there is a data engineer or an analyst who knows SQL who has to do that work. And so the reason we put the database query GUI inside the spreadsheet is so that way a regular knowledge worker, someone who understands their data, maybe they know VLOOKUPs, can do this without needing any engineers in the loop. And so that was the main thing we did. And so we said, oh, well, you should be able to save that, pull in a user table, and then be able to get everything printed out. So that way the next person who comes along can just access the data library of objects, and they don't have to go looking for various data things. So that's a brief overview of Sourcetable. The other things you can do, of course, is that we have a bunch of templates. So for any Shopify users here, you might find that you want to get, an overview of your entire business. Because we know the schema of a lot of SaaS tools, we're actually able to provide you with templates out of the box. So for example, if you want to know your sales or your conversion rate or units sold, what you can do is you can just access one of our pre-built templates, and then we'll just wire everything up for you and it'll work. So if you just give this a second, you'll see that fireworks, we're going to get a dashboard, right? And the important thing to note is that this dashboard is built from data tables that are actually pulling from your data, your customers' data and your referral data and whatever that might be, but it always stays up to date. And you didn't have to do any work to set this up. It just works out of the box. And so one of the reasons we like helping set people up is because we chat with them and we find out what templates they need, and then we can kind of create a template, and then every other user can access that template for all time. Some people just use us for a dashboarding solution. So, we have charts and graphs and all the different kinds of visualizations you might need. So that way you can just get your sales graphs off the ground. So we have a bunch of pipe drive people using the system because they don't like the visualization solution there, and they use us instead. Another simple basic thing, we were kind of curious which party led to more deaths during COVID. This is obviously rudimentary analysis and not meant to be taken seriously. But the main thing to know is that if you want to actually analyze this data, you need to pull in a 0.5 gigabit data file that will be millions of rows long, that will not fit in Google Sheets. And it will be very hard to access in Excel, and it is trivially easy in Sourcetable. And so what we do is we pull it in and we provide you with all of the things you may need to be able to analyze a large data set. So you can aggregate, for example, over a count of deaths. We actually joined together the voter record and the COVID record. So that way we could see, like, what is the mortality rate? Where do these mortalities happen? And then you can actually go through and look at what's the percentage of each country, of each county. Obviously this is not meant to be taken seriously. And the things you could do from here is bring in more data sets and say, what is the density of people living, and that kind of stuff. Someone sent me a chat thing, but is there an upper limit to the size of data that can be used in Sourcetable? The largest CSV file currently is 25 gigabits. So that's what we have currently. If you have larger data needs, then we can chat and sort something out. I think currently we don't let accounts go beyond 40 gig. But yeah, most people are not going to have 25 gig CSV files, but you can actually use them in Sourcetable and analyze them in Sourcetable, and you won't be able to do it in Sheets or Excel. So that was not the problem we set out to solve, but because of the infrastructure that we've built, it's actually really easy. Obviously, and if you want to find like your sales data from Facebook, we pull in Facebook analysis, and you can pull that in too and figure out, what are my customers doing and where are they from and what are they spending and buying. And then there's another admin interface that shows you the data, but that's probably enough to get started on for a Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, any questions from anyone, do chuck those into Q&A or chat. Questions from me. So right now, what does your team look like? Are you self-funded? Did you raise capital? What's it currently looking like for you in terms of growing the startup?
Yeah, for sure. So we're 5 people full-time plus I'm a part-time marketing person. And that person spends a lot of time currently just helping our users to be able to get the most out of the platform and figure out, what kind of templates do you want? Because we know that really helps the next user. So the team is pretty much 4 full-time engineers plus me, plus the part-time marketing person. We are hiring. So if you're a designer who can code, we'd love to speak with you. And then it is worth saying, on the general engineering front, we are slowly hiring. But I will mention that spreadsheets are one of the hardest things you can build. So we're pretty selective. If you have a really solid background in computer science, but you also like working at startups, you might be a good fit here, and we might have fun.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, so if anyone is interested, they should reach out to you on LinkedIn or website or... Yeah,
LinkedIn's good. Team at Sourcetable is also good. Yes, you're asking the size of the team and then funding. Yes, we haven't announced any funding rounds, but I can say initially it was self-funded. We funded the project through our consulting shop, the money we made from the data cubes, and then raised money during the really bad part of COVID, which was an experience in and of itself, and then raised money again when the recession hit, which was another experience in and of itself. We haven't announced, but yeah, we obviously, this is the kind of thing that can't be built without venture capital, and so can be pretty helpful to be in San Francisco, and over time just build that network. And that's ultimately how we were able to fund the company, is because people had kind of worked with us and built stuff with us. And so some of our first clients at the dev shop had the initial money for the company.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's always a continuous journey in the world of raising capital. But that's awesome that you've got a few over the line. Got a question here from Keegan. Can you connect this to a real-time streaming service or MQTT captain? I don't know what that means, but interesting. Yeah, to blend real-time with attribution data.
I think the best way I could answer this is to say ish. In theory, yes. In practice, we'll probably say no to that early on. And the reason is because we really want to focus on simple use cases, such as data access and keeping data up to date. Most people don't need data more than daily, and we offer it, I think it's within a 5-minute window. And so you can get more granular if you need it. So if you have a custom integration that needs to be more granular, we can work on that. But yeah, using RabbitMQ or Kafka, not yet in the future. You'll notice in the deck I didn't talk about database choices, and there's reasons for that.
And just curious, in terms of the vibe in San Francisco at the moment, I know everyone will probably have seen there's been a lot of tech layoffs, a lot of change going on. What have you kind of seen in terms of that environment, and how do you see things going in the next wee while?
Well, layoffs are always sad, right? Like if you're running a business, it's by far the hardest thing you ever have to do in a business context. Where to start? As a business owner, it's easier to hire. There is less competition, and you notice that in terms of the number of applications coming in, the quality of applications coming in, the competition from those applicants in terms of what other options they have and what other things they're pursuing. There's more people turning up for hire by startups that might otherwise have just decided to, go get paid extraordinary salaries elsewhere. So in terms of the hiring front, it is significantly easier to hire and retain talent, and the talent bar is better in terms of just the amount of people on the market. And yeah. On the capital raising side, obviously harder. On the vibe in San Francisco, let's see. San Francisco has been massively affected by COVID. I think everybody here knows it. When you walk around downtown, it's a really different experience. In addition to that, tech workers are able to work remotely more than most other categories of workers. And the San Francisco ones have the most options. And so they have decided not to go back to the workplace. And that changes the way the culture of the city runs. There is less density downtown. There are less people working downtown. So you see less people at lunches. You see less people in offices. The occupancy rate in San Francisco offices is the lowest in the country. In addition to that, you will find that at meetups and events, it is massively less people. In my personal network, what I noticed is that a lot of people actually stayed in the Greater Bay Area, but they made a life change into the satellite of, maybe a couple of hours. And so people come in for things, but yeah, it's definitely changed. It's coming back though. You can tell that it's coming back. The vibe has changed. It's coming back. I think that's going to take a while. One thing that hasn't changed is that the amount of venture capital here is still very, very large. I think proportionally, it's probably a little less because crypto has had a big impact on the economy. Also, nice crypto's crashed, so there's just way less funny money going for developers. So there's some of the things. Personally, I we're lucky that we raised a healthy round. We've got years of runway, and we're able to just weather the storm and stay focused and build the best product we can.
And I know that's the advice going out to a lot of founders as well, is try to raise enough that you do have that runway to get you through this potentially quite tough period. We've got a couple of questions that have just come through. Hey, loved hearing about your journey. Would love to hear how you avoid burnout and look after your mental health when you're in the grind of a startup.
Failure sucks. So when the one didn't work, well, a bunch didn't work out, but that was the one I put the most time into. Just decided to not pick up and do another startup straight away. different people are different. Although I will say that I've had some friends that went straight from one startup to another, and a year in became really hard for them to sustain. Yeah, for me, I have designed a large amount of my life around getting outside. So I have a garden. I'm not a great gardener, but I like to spend time just weeding things and growing things. And that's a really good task switch from being on a computer and there's a lot of sunlight. And then obviously I try to exercise where I can. So I'm always hiking or surfing or getting outside. And I've kind of designed my life that way because, you can only control the things you can control as a startup. And I think it's really important to remember that. And, having healthy relationships and a healthy mind and body is really important. For what it's worth, I picked up meditation along the way. And so I found, I do TM, but people do different things. Yeah, I found that it's really helpful for being able to kind of calm the nervous system and kind of figure out where the chatter is. And, it's a physical and mental game as much as it is a business game. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that everybody is going through hard things, but I think in a business context, the swings and roundabouts at startups can just be a little more sudden and severe. And kind of now that I've been through a couple of them, I just try to focus on what I can control and tune out the rest.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely not easy being a founder, as I'm sure everyone will know. But it's definitely important to look after your mental health and do those things that can kind of help make life a little more relaxing in such a hectic environment. Question here from Daniel. What are the plans and growth for 2023 staff, customers, and product enhancements?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, I mentioned we're in private beta, so we're not planning to do any big, massive public launches until the product is super dialed in. So starting from the beginning, we are about to launch a public embed thing. Some people wanted to be able to put their charts on their blogs, and it was a bit off-piste, but yeah. So if you know that Tableau's public data library, we have something like that coming down the pike. People can play with that. It's free, it's easy to use. In addition to that, there's a bunch of calculated columns things. So you would have seen the data tables that were in the application. Once you have a data table and you are able to edit that data table through calculations or notes, it turns out what you've built is a full object management system. And people want to be able to manage their supply chains and simple business tasks, whether that is checkboxes or notes or calculations. So we've got that. But effectively, we just weren't pushing that before this talk because I didn't want to go unstable. But yeah, so we've got that coming down the pike. That's a pretty big one in terms of the way you're able to extend the power of spreadsheets. I think people forget that a lot of the work for data analysts is writing transforms in SQL to be able to get like a string of numbers to join to other numbers. And now you can do those transforms in spreadsheets. So you can just write a regex or write whatever, transform the column and then do a join on that column or build more off that column. Sorry, I know that's kind of a wonky answer, but I'm really excited about the extension for data tables. There's a bit more around collaboration that's coming. Right now, we're more collaborative than we're more collaborative than Excel, but not more collaborative than Google Sheets. So getting up to parity on that. Ironically, we're actually about to launch a SQL interface. And the reason for that is that it turns out that you can use visual queries for most things. Some people are data analysts who know SQL and they have to prepare reports in a spreadsheet, but they actually want their world to be in the same place. And so instead of resisting, we heard enough people say they wanted a SQL interface and they weren't the majority, but they're a vocal minority. And it was consistent enough that we've built a full SQL interface with queries and subqueries, and that plays also with our visual SQL editor. So that's coming. More integrations for sure. We love connecting with data. So you'll just see more data of every type. We have a pretty solid data flow set up now. So if we don't have something that you want, just let us know and we'll probably be able to add it pretty quickly. In terms of templates, there's more templates coming down the pike. I personally really like templates and I find them really helpful. And, I like, getting a CAC model or CPC model or a, LTV or return on ad spend model. being able to get those. And so we want to help users, and we've heard they want them. So we'll do that. And then the last thing, which in terms of hiring plans is, you may have noticed that it is a functional product. I don't consider it a psychologically pleasing product. And I saw the experience that Airtable had on users when it came to market. And that was noticeable. And so we're going to put a bit of design effort into that. In terms of the more technical aspects of the product, I don't think I'm going to talk about that on a recorded webinar, but we've got a lot of fun things to continue making Sourcetable more powerful than Excel and thus other spreadsheets. I think that was the question. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, lots of things in the works. But yeah, you're still on beta at the moment, but if anyone was keen, they could just flick your message or an email.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone who wants it, it's just team@sourcetable.com. Say hi, and we'd love to get you set up.
Awesome. Cool. We're just about at the hour. So we'll wrap up now, but amazing. Thank you so much for sharing a bit about your journey and a bit about Sourcetable. I'm sure I've definitely learned a fair bit about spreadsheets and how Sourcetable works. And yeah, super exciting to see where you go over the next year or in a few years. And maybe catch you in San Francisco in a couple of weeks.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, if anyone's kind of thinking about moving to San Francisco or interested or they just moved here, just hit me up on LinkedIn and connect and happy to chat. But yeah, I'd love to catch up.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Keep an eye out for the upcoming webinars on territory3.community, as well as some meetups over the States. Yeah, San Francisco, Austin, Denver, and LA coming up over the next month. And we've also got a meetup in Auckland next Thursday. So yeah, fair bit going on, but it's good to get things back into action for the year. Cool, awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch you guys on the next one, and thank you, Owen, as well. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Leah. Bye.
Cool.